for everybody. It ain't 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 for everybody. Yeah, many you call, but few get chosen. Matthew 22:14. My righteousness gonna exceed that of the Pharisees.
If you're looking for high quality clothing at affordable costs, check out peculiarapparel.com. My name is Dawad.
And I'm Shayar, and we are the owners of Peculiar Apparel. All of our products are made with 100% natural fabrics, no mixed materials.
We have t-shirts for the man, woman, and child. These can be purchased with or without fringes.
Our women's line of t-shirts currently do not include fringes, but if that's something you desire, send us a DM at peculiarapparel_ on Instagram, or send us an email at help@peculiarapparel.com.
So once again, that is peculiarapparel.com.
Peculiar Apparel for peculiar people.
Shalom, family. That commercial reminded me I gotta go to Peculiar Apparel and get me a couple shirts. Shalom, family.
Hey, shalom, family.
Khan. So we just want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to the Most High God, whose name is Yahweh, and we do so by Shem, which means in the name of His only begotten Son, whose name is Yahweh Shai, who most know as Jesus Christ. And the title for the day, for the lesson, is the importance of retraining your mind. And our beloved brother Aaron is going to be bringing the lesson for us. So if you tuned in and you haven't already, please give us a like and a share on the video. Also comment, let us know that you're watching along with us. And there's also a highlight feature, like you see where brother Aaron is highlighted on the screen what he mentioned, and he said, I hope everyone is well. Make sure to like the video and comment and share, and you can use the @ button along with highlight to be able to see for your friends, to more of your friends to see the content easier. But all praise to the Most High. And you got it out.
Khan, absolutely. Beautiful intro as always. And first and foremost, I'll start by giving all praises to the Most High in the name of His beloved Son Yahweh Shai, who many call Jesus Christ, some call Yeshua of Nazareth, etc. As a brother touched on, the name of this lesson is titled "The Importance of Retraining Your Mind." And first, I want to start off by reading a passage. I'm gonna get my screen shared, and we can dive right into it. So we're going to start with the book of Romans, chapter 12. And if you can, if you could read this. I got it in the NET, the Net Bible. I like how it puts it. But if you can just read verses 1 through 2.
God. And it reads, therefore I exhort you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, alive, holy, and pleasing to God, which is your reasonable service. Do not be conformed to this present world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may be, so that you may test and approve what is the will of God, what is good and well-pleasing and perfect.
Right. So the Apostle Paul says we ought to present our bodies as a sacrifice. And then in this version, it says alive, holy, and pleasing to the Most High. And, this is speaking about, living our lives for the Most High in a way that's pleasing to Him. And then when you jump down to verse 2, he speaks about not being conformed to this present world. And that word world is in reference to an age, or a period. But we have to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, so that we can test and prove what is the will of the Most High. So first, let's look at this word conformed. And a pattern that we're going to run into tonight is I'm going to be going into a lot of words. So we're going to be stopping and looking at a bunch of words tonight. So I just want y'all to be prepared for that. So let's look at the word conformed. It's G. Let me see. Scroll down just a tad bit. Yeah, I might have passed it. Here we go. G 4964, and it's Suz Hematizo. And when you look at the biblical usage as well as the definition, it just means to pattern or fashion oneself. So basically, in a nutshell, it's saying that we shouldn't fashion or pattern ourselves after this present age, and that includes the way of thinking today. And that's just one part, right? But let's look at the other part of this passage, because understanding what conforming is very important, because that means to fashion yourself or pattern yourself after something, right? But let's look at this word renewing. Let's go to G 432. Matter of fact, I want to pull it up on Bible Hub real quick. And if you could, once I pull it up, can you read it for me? Oh, you must have dropped out.
Yeah, I'm back, Oxalaki.
But I'm gonna pull it up here. We're gonna get it going.
That's crazy. I don't know why I just did that. It just kicked me out.
I'm like, hey, I had said something to you. I'm like, you're not even here. Then I just hit the pop button. But yeah, I'm gonna pull this up in on Bible Hub. I'm gonna need you to read this word for renewing.
Con. Anakianosis.
Hey, and you got it too. That's it right there. That was a beautiful pronunciation. But yeah, I got to share it on the screen. So if you can just take a look at just the helps word studies.
Con. So anakianosis, it means completing a process which intensifies. Kano means to make fresh or new. See 2537. Properly, a new development, a renewal achieved by God's power.
Beautiful. And so, as the brother said, it's a anakinosis. And as you can see right here, this particular word is made up of two roots. The first one being ana, which is G303. And then the second one is kainos, which is 2537, which, ana means to complete a process, and kainos means to make fresh or new. So together, this particular phrase means to redo or recomplete. But contextually, this phrase is being used to convey the meaning of a complete change for the better. So basically, in a nutshell, we are to not fashion or pattern ourselves after today's world, but we have to renovate ourselves or re-complete ourselves, which includes us retraining our mind, so that we can know the will and desire of the Most High, right? Now, I want to emphasize that, this is important, in regard to the title, because unless we retrain our minds, we'll continue to do the things, the things that we were doing before, and in the same manner as well, but in order for us to do what the Most High, wants and desires of us, we have to make sure that we retrain our minds to do things in accordance to his instructions, right? Now, real quick, I want to look at the word retrain, the English word retrain. And if you got anything, you could always jump in as well.
Not yet. Praise.
Kind of. So if you can, I'm gonna share my screen.
All right. Train.
Yeah, I'm gonna scroll down. I might have to blow this up a little bit. I don't know why it's so small.
Uh,
Lord in Christ. Um, but yeah, you can read this one right here.
So this is train, and it's a verb. It means to discipline, teach, bring to a desired state by means of instruction. 1540s, probably from earlier sense of draw out and manipulate in order to bring to a desired form. Late 14th century, specifically of the growth of branches, vines, etc. From mid 15th century, from train, the noun.
God, and that's fine right there, right?
Uh,
But as we look at the etymology for the word train, and if you scroll up within this link, it gives you this information. But the word train, it derives from French and Latin, and as a brother read it, it means to discipline, teach, and bring to a desired state by mean of instruction. So, in regard to the topic, training our minds again is crucial because we need to know what the Most High wants, and that includes, of course, this training. It includes, how we look at the book that contains the Most High's instructions. Right? We have to reshape our minds. We have um, to look at these things in a I guess a different light, so to speak. How we had been looking at it before, and of course, like when you come into this truth, a lot of times you take that that first step or two. You stop looking at the scriptures in the same way. You stop looking at the law from the sense of, oh, that's something old, they did back then. But you look at it as something that I'm supposed to be doing now in order to please my God, right? Well, you got any points before I move on?
beautiful, beautiful. I'll say just observance and research.
All praises,
Con,
all praises. So first thing that goes into this training or this retraining is looking into the language. And I want to give a preface and a disclaimer. I'm not saying that anybody has to, go out there and be, just a linguist and you just, the Hebrew language like the back of your hand or anything like that. That's not my point. But looking into the language and trying to learn about it is very important. So, first, I want to start off with the prologue from the book of Ecclesiasticus, right? And the brother, brother, I think you might have mentioned. I know you've been like I've been talking to you offline, so I know you've been mentioning it a lot. But I think you might have mentioned it Tuesday as well about the force and how certain words and passages they lose their force when taken out of their original language, right?
con.
Um, well, I'm gonna pull this up and I'm gonna have you read it. And I know you're aware of the part I'm talking about. I'm gonna try to find it swiftly. Um, yep, and it's right here.
I see
So,
it.
con.
Con. Wherefore, let me entreat you to read it with favor and attention, and to pardon us, wherein we may seem to come short of some words, which we have labored to interpret. For the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And not only these things, but the law itself and the prophets and the rest of the books have no small difference when they are spoken in their own language. For
Con.
the eight kind.
That's good right there. Because this prologue is nasty. I'm not gonna lie. It's a beautiful prologue. But we can stop right there, right? Just for the sake of time, because I'm going to be going into quite a few things. But basically the point here is that ideas that are translated from the Hebrew language to another language tend to lose their force. Because for one, I want to give you guys a fact. Um, for one, the Hebrew language conveys ideas and concepts in a concrete manner. Which means by way of tangible aspects. So this would include, things that are able to be seen, things that are able to be smelt, touched, heard, and tasted. Your five senses, right? But a lot of other languages that the Hebrew language or the Hebrew text is translated into, they're abstract languages. I.e., English, i.e., Greek, and all of the Romance languages, right? All of these languages, they convey ideas and concepts in a manner that it's not so tangible, but they're more abstract, right? And so this would you know you know mean that they're taking passages that are conveying ideas in a way that you can touch, see, smell, etc., and they're turning it into something that you feel, right? A big example is the concept of love today, right? When you look at love in a Greek concept, right, is or a Greek or even a Western concept. This is something that you feel. But according to our people, according to the ancient Hebrews, the Israelites of the Bible, um, love wasn't this thing that you feel, but it was an action and things that you did to display, right? You displayed love. A perfect example. A lot of people, they read Matthew 5, and I wasn't going to go into this, but I'm gonna go on a short tangent. A lot of people, they read a passage like Matthew 5, where the Messiah, he says to love your enemies, right? And people, they think this is talking about a feeling, right? You have to feel a certain way about them, you have to like them or whatever. But as we read in the law, I think it's in Exodus 23, it says if you see your enemy's ox, and also if you see the one that hates you, if his donkey is going astray, then you have to return it back to him, right? And this is a showing of love. This is a display of love. Despite what you guys' issues are, you're given that act or that display of love, right? And so again, when we look at concepts from the Hebrew language to the Greek language, there's a lot of times there's a disconnect, and so people, they try to make these scriptures, especially in the so-called New Testament and the Old Testament, clash because the concepts of the languages are displayed different, right? But it's very important to understand something like this and to understand the differences between the languages, because you'll be able to better explain and better reconcile the Bible from front to back, right? But you got any points before I move on?
Beautiful points being made. Well, I'll kind of add on to about the force and the strength of these words and how these different translations, they don't have, like, when you look into the language and you actually analyze what these words mean, it doesn't give it justice when you read a lot of these words in English, because it's too much room for you to be in error when you read these things, because it's not direct, it's not straight to the point. And that's one thing about the Hebrew. The Hebrew is direct and straight to the point. But English, I mean, you got, just like we see the noun and the verb train. This is the dumbest language. Like meat and meat. It's spelled the exact same way, but they're two completely different things. And you have to just rely on context to help you understand which meat it's talking about. So that's the thing about Hebrew. You're not going to be confused because it's completely direct and to the point.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Yeah, and that's a good example because like even when we read in like the Bible, I believe when John the Baptist he says you have to show forth fruits or bring forth fruits meat of repentance. Um, I believe the spelling there is Meet,
God.
but like you use that in just a colloquial sense, Meet. It's like you're like a meet and greet, like you're about to be introduced to somebody that you don't know. So it's like yeah, that definitely that's a good point because the Hebrew language is not ambiguous in nature, but a lot of the languages that we speak, especially here in the Western Hemisphere, they can be ambiguous in nature. So definitely a great point.
God.
Next point, I would need you to read this. It's from this excerpt in this book called "Learn to Read Biblical Hebrew" by Jeff Benner, and he he makes a really good point about why it's important to learn the language, right? So we're gonna read this, and then I'm gonna show y'all a few examples. If you can, hopefully this is this big enough.
Con, that's good.
Con. Just this one paragraph right here.
Con. Why learn Hebrew? A translation of the biblical text is a translator's interpretation of the text. The translator's beliefs will often influence how the text will be translated, and anyone using his translation is seeing it through his eyes rather than the original authors. Only by studying the original language of the Bible can one see the text in its original state. And that's crazy because we were just talking to this brother today about this same exact thing. That's the
Yeah,
spirit.
yeah, exactly. Like when we were having that conversation, I said, "Man, this is crazy," because I'm literally going into this tonight. So all praises to the Most High for for the confirmation. But we're able to see just based upon the quote or the excerpt. We're able to see the original state of the Most High's word by studying out the language that it was originally written in. And when we're able, to actually look at the text in its original language, we can get to the bottom of what the text actually says versus, settling for a misreading of an English translation. Now before, we go into an example of, why the language is important. I want to emphasize, that language is important for determining what translation is, I guess the most accurate in a particular circumstance and instance. Because if the language says one thing, it should, and I use the word should, it should reflect in the translation. So I want y'all to keep that in mind. I don't want y'all to think that, translations are just bad. The translators, they did a very, important work, because most people, like especially here in America, we read English, so they did a very important work. But however, as we read in the prologue in Sirach, there are things that get lost in translation. You know, the Hebrew text, it may not carry the same force when translated into an English text because English is like its polar opposite. You're trying to explain something Hebraically in an English text, and it's very hard to do so. So again, there's always going to be, you know, uh, you know, you know, I guess room for improvement, so to speak. When it comes to any translation, right? But I believe that the translators they did the best that they could, but it again, it's just all the more important to look at the original language, right? But before I move on, you have any points?
La
Con, con, all praises. So let's go to an example, right? Let's go to. Let me get my screen share back again. Let's go to the book of Leviticus. This is a common one that's misunderstood by some. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 19.
Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. Neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee.
Right. So in this particular translation, the King James Version, which is, I think this is the most popular version of the Bible, at least in the Western Hemisphere, if not the entire earth, right? But in this translation, it says not to gender with diverse kind, which means to mate different animals with one another, and that would be, an example that would be like a goat and a cow. If these two animals were not to mate together or to gender with one another because they're not the same kind, right? And a good example, I watch a show. Me and my rib, we watch a show called Avatar: Legend of Korra, right? And on this show, it's like I don't think I've seen just a regular animal on here. It's like everything is like like it's a platypus bear, a polar bear dog. It's all types of ridiculous mixes of animals, but obviously in our time, right? And even today, we're still not supposed to gender two different animals together. There shouldn't be a polar bear dog. There shouldn't be any type of hybrid. And even the hybrids that we see today, those inventions are not righteous, right? Um, Next, it mentions the concept, the same concept for seeds. Um, and then when you continue to read down, it mentions linen and woolen. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting this is because I know the brother heard he has the same understanding, but we're of the understanding that you're not supposed to wear mixed fabric of any kind. So whether if it's not limited to just linen and woolen, right? But there are a lot of people that understand this text to be subjecting the law to just saying, hey, you just can't, mix together linen and woolen, but everything else, you good, right? But that's not what this text is teaching, right? And I want to jump into the Hebrew language to actually support, why we would say such a thing, right? Let's look at, just want to pay attention to a particular phrase. Let me see. It's 19. Yeah, that's 19. God, here we go. So this would be uvaged, which is this means, so the u or the wa would be and, vaged, which would be garment. It would be a garment. And I want y'all to pay attention to like the part, like what we have to do with parsing out a particular passage, because when you parse out something, that means you're slowly analyzing something, right? So when you want to get down to what, if a particular passage is translated correctly, you parse out the passage itself and you look at right here the Hebrew text, and this is based on a Masoretic text. But again, it says and garment, and then here it says keyelim, which is in reference to diverse, right, or mingled. And then continuing on, this is sha'at tanez, right? Sha'at tanez is in reference Right here it says linen and woolen, but when you look at this particular word, it means mixed stuff. If I remember correctly, yep, mixed stuff, fabric of mixed weave. And then it mentions linsey woolsey, but it says a kind of cloth forbidden for garments, cloth made by weaving linen and wool together. And then you look at it in the definition, it mentions garment of diverse sorts, right? And the example is linen and woolen because this was obviously a big example because linen and wool, these things were heavily worn, right? So it was understood not to mix these two things together. But when you look at the Hebrew language, this particular word here, sha'atanaz, is in reference to a garment that's mixed altogether, right? So this isn't limited. Again, I just want to make it clear, this isn't limited to linen and woolen, but this would apply to any mixed fabric. And just to hammer the point home, right? Because we have to look at the language and also you look at different translations because I want to let y'all know, we can't subject ourselves to just one English translation because there's no translation that's perfect. I want to make that clear, because as the brother read in the excerpt, a few moments ago, it said that a translation is merely an interpretation, right? So, you can't rely merely on one's, interpretation, but you have to look at the text, the Hebrew text for itself and cross-reference it with what a translation is saying and see what lines up, for yourself. Now, let's look at this in a few different translations, right? Brother Hurt, could you read the same text? Can you read it in ESV right here?
Time. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seeds, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. That's kind of on point.
Absolutely. The CSB, it says the same thing. The NASB 20, it says the same thing. These different translations, they pretty much say the same thing. Even the NET. Can you read the NET?
You must keep my statutes. You must not allow two different kinds of your animals to breed. You must not sow your field with two different kinds of seed, and you must not wear a garment made of two different kinds of fabric.
All right. So, we right here, this is just one example, of the importance of diving into the the original language and also cross-referencing different translations, because we're able to determine what the text is actually saying. We don't have to settle, for an interpretation based on a misreading, right? And if you have any points, you can jump in before I go to the next one.
I'll say, David, very good point. I did a lesson on that. I'm gonna highlight what this brother said. It's a very good point. When you mix linen and wool, they cause sickness and the immune system to break down or be weakened. But either one of these fabrics on their own promote healing of the body and strengthens the immune system and the body's natural electromagnetic field. And I actually did a lesson and I touched on this and went into some information. And I'll put that in the comments just in case y'all want to look into that later on. But that's a very beautiful point. I'll praise the water. And so what I was gonna say is, a lot of people, because we know the truth and we understand the language, we understand that certain translations may make people have a certain doctrine. So when they come kick their doctrine and we say, okay, what you reading? All right, we're gonna read it together. And now I'm gonna go into context. And now I'm gonna help you understand what you just read because you're interpreting it very incorrectly. And we go into the language. And so they'll think like, oh, you reading a completely different Bible. No, we're going into the origin of the words to actually see what they mean. And people get offended by that and make it seem like you're reading something completely different from what they are.
Right.
But this just shows you that the translations do matter sometimes. It really does matter sometimes because KJV didn't have it right, but all these other translations did. So that's all I wanted to add.
Excellent point. Excellent point. All praises to the Most High. But let's go into the next example, right? And the next one is the Passover and who's allowed to partake in it. All right. And so what we're going to do first is we're just going to read the ordinance pertaining to the Passover in and of itself, and then we'll go back over it. So if you can, let me share my screen. If you can you read Exodus 12, verse 43 all the way down to 48?
Con. Starting at verse 43. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof, but every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and a hired servant shall not eat thereof. Scroll down a little bit.
Yes, lock in.
In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof.
So jumping back up to verse 43, I'll read it again. It says, and the Most High said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. So first off, we read about the ordinance or a prescribed task of the Passover, stating that no stranger is to participate in the Passover. And then throughout the preceding verses, we see select groups that can participate in the Passover, if they're circumcised, and then some that can't. And we don't see a provision, of circumcision stated, within those particular passages that speak about the ones that can't partake in it. It just says that they can't do it, right? But, as you look at verse 44, it mentions that a servant, when he's circumcised, he can partake of the Passover, right? So you jump to verse 45, just following the pattern. It says a foreigner and a hired servant cannot, as I stated previously, they cannot partake in the Passover, and it doesn't provide a particular provision for them to get circumcised and then partake of it. We don't see that within the pericope, just based on those verses, right? So it's clear that there's a distinction, between the type of person, that verse 44 highlights, and then there's a distinction between one that's mentioned in verse 45, and the distinction, based on the law in totality and the narrative of Exodus 12 in and of itself is nationality, and we see this, in the Torah, that there are Israelites who can be bought, as a servant, right? Or to be, a servant, right? And that's, you read that in Exodus, or the book of Exodus, the 21st chapter, when it mentions a Hebrew servant, right? And just real quick, I'm gonna pull that up, so that we can just touch on it real brief. But we're gonna jump back to Exodus 21 momentarily, right? If you can, just read Exodus 21, verses 1 through 2.
Time. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing.
So we see that a Hebrew servant, which in this case is in reference to an Israelite, can be bought. And right here, it gives provision for him to be released the 7th year of his hire. So that speaks to the fact that an Israelite can be a servant who was bought. And in this particular case, jumping back to Exodus 12, if he was bought and under the event that he wasn't circumcised, He would just have to be circumcised as his master, by his master, and he could partake in the Passover. But in verse 45, as was mentioned before, there's no such provision made. They just cannot partake in the Passover. Now, we know the only group that can't partake in the Passover is non-Israelites. I want to, stress that again, right? Now, I want to prove that. Let's jump back up to verse 43. Very important. If you can, could you read verse 43?
And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof.
So let's look at the Hebrew language right here. Right, let's highlight it. So biggest point. So you can look at it here. It's Wayomer Yahweh El Moshe Wa Ahran Zot Chuket, which Chuket is ordinance or statute. Then you look at this is the main point we want right here, right? It's Hapasach, which is the Passover. Kal, which means all or every. Then there's Bain, which is a child or a member, right? When you look at that word, it means a child or a member. And then it says Nechar, meaning stranger or heathendom. And we're going to jump into that momentarily. And then there's Lo, which is no or not. Yokal, meaning he eat. Bo, him, right? So when you look at this particular passage, it's basically, especially the highlighted portion, is basically saying that the Passover, every child or member of the Nechar, which means the heathendom, is not to eat. Now, I want to show y'all just to prove what I'm saying. Let's look at this particular word for bane, right? Which is typically translated to the word son. But when you look at a usage and definition, we see right here son, grandson, child, member of a group. That's very important to keep in mind, right? And you see the basically the same thing here in the definitions. It pretty much repeats it, but again, it speaks to the fact that every member of the heathendom is not to eat of the Passover, right? That's the point that's being conveyed, and a lot of people they wrestle back and forth with this particular passage because they'll say, oh well, look, you jump down to verse 48. It just, it said that they just have to be circumcised, right? And we're going to get to that momentarily. But I want to show y'all something. I found this out a few years ago. Just, over the years, studying this. Let's read this in the BBE. That's the basic, or the Bible in Basic English. Because this particular translation it puts things in basic English, but the translation is actually pretty decent. If you can you read the BBE?
And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover. No man who is not an Israelite is to take of it.
Like it makes it super clear.
Real plain. It was already plain.
Exactly. It was already plain, but it's like it's no getting around this. You get what I'm saying? But just even looking at going back to the interlinear, just parsing out the passage in and of itself. When we look at this particular phrase down here, hapasach, that's the Passover. Call this right here, Bain Nechar, is every or every member of the heathen, right? This is what this is in reference to. And just in case I didn't want to make sure I prove that, because I don't want anybody to say, oh well, he just saying that. He didn't click on the word. I want to show you it actually says this. So this Strong's H5236, Nechar, which means foreign, alien, foreignness, that which is foreign. Then the definition, it says a foreigner, or abstractly heathendom. So 9 times out of 10, when we see this word placed in the scriptures, it's in reference to non-Israelites, right? And any other time is not. It's very apparent that an Israelite is being referenced to, and it's not in a good connotation either, right? It's basically saying that we've been wicked in a certain way, we've acted like them, etc., etc. But again, this is why it's very important to look into the language, because right here, like the prevailing thought and understanding, especially amongst our people, especially in Israel, is that the heathen, they can partake in the Passover. The non-Israelites, they can partake in Passover. That's what most people believe and teach. But a lot of people, they don't truthfully go into the language and show what like what does it mean when it says Bain Nakhar? Like why is it saying all of the heathendom is not to eat? Like why does it say that? Like, is that true? Is that actually true, or all they got to do is just get circumcised? It doesn't really add up. But if you got any points, you could jump in on.
Good.
All praises. So, let's jump down to verse 47, right? Because verse 47, it makes a powerful point. If you could read verse 47.
All the congregation of Israel shall keep it.
God. So, verse 47, it emphasizes who is to partake in the Passover, right? Now, right here, I want to look at the language. Even though it's very straightforward and to the point, all of the congregation of Israel shall keep it, right? There's, believe it or not, people try to make this mean something that it doesn't mean.
I was already looking at it and flipping it, because I know how they'll flip it, because we talk to so many of them. See, the congregation, anybody could be in the congregation.
You already know. Like that's, they always, they always try to flip it and twist what the passage is saying. But let's look at the Hebrew language here, because there's no wiggle room within the language. So it says Kol Adat, Yasha'Allah Yisrael, Ya'asu, Oto, right? Now, I want to highlight this particular word, Adat, right? 57:12. Now, when you look at the definition and the biblical usage just on the surface, it's very plain. It just says congregation gathering, right? And then even within the definition, it says assemblage, a family, which is, and I've appealed to this point before, right? Because but again, a lot of people, they'll, like how the brother said, they'll try to flip it. Like, well, anybody can be joined into the family. Like they'll try to flip it, right? But let's look at the Jacinius Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, right? So when we look here, it says the congregation of the Israelites, and then it makes mention of Exodus 12:3. Exodus 12:3 it uses the same phrase that Exodus 12:47 uses. It uses Adat Yisrael, or Adat Yasha'Allah, right? And when you look at what a congregation is a group or a gathering. So basically it's saying a gathering or a group of Israelites. So after all of that being said, from all the way from verse 43 to verse 47, the point that's hammered home in verse 47 is that the whole group of Israelites are to celebrate the Passover. That's the point. So now let's jump down to verse 48 and let's deal with that.
And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof.
Right. So, people, they'll say, well, look, brother, this is the stranger, they can partake in the Passover. They'll be just like one that's born in the land. Well, first and foremost, right, this provision is being provided not only for that day, but the future as well. And the Most High, with his infinite knowledge, because we have to remember that the Most High, he knows everything. He knows what's going to happen. He knows when it's going to happen, etc. Right? The Most High knows that there will be a diaspora, people, they're going to move, a scattering is going to happen, etc. The Most High, he knows all of these things. So one that's born in the land, that doesn't just automatically mean, okay, these are the Israelites, and anybody that's not born in the land, they're not an Israelite. That's ridiculous. You look at the Apostle Paul, he wasn't born in the land of Israel. He's born in Tarshish, right? Which is in Italy. So the Apostle Paul, a prime example of somebody that's an Israelite, obviously that's not born in the land. And there were plenty of people that fit that bill, right? Let's look at the Hebrew language here. Because again, just looking at the language, it kind of puts this, this whole notion to bed, right? So let's look at the beginning. It says, Wake Yagur et Ka Ger what Asay Pesach, right? Pesach is, again, that's in reference to the Passover. So to parse this particular phrase out, it would be, and for or when he sojourns with you, the sojourner, and celebrates Passover, right? And then it goes on to say, you look at this particular word right here, it says hemol, right? Which means the circumcision. So this is saying that if one who is a sojourner stays or dwells with you, referring to them in the land, then that person, in order to eat the Passover, they have to be circumcised. Now, let's look at the Hebrew language for the word sojourn, right? And most high willing, Brother Craig, if we get a chance, I'll try to address your question a little bit later on.
Con, I was just going to ask you, did you want to address
it?
But yeah.
Because most high will, yeah, if you can remind me of, we'll try to address it. Con. But let's look at this word to sojourn, right? 1481. So it's the word gaur, right? Which means to sojourn, to basically to dwell, to remain, etc., right? To stay with somebody. Now, I want to show y'all something. Let's jump down to the Brown Driver Briggs. And this is a very good tool to know how to utilize, because it can be, pretty resourceful, and it could be a help when, just actually studying out, just the particulars within the language, right? So let's look for Exodus 12, right? So if you can, matter of fact, I think I'll just read it, right? So, okay, so it says, particularly, particularly of the ger, and that's the word for stranger in verse 48, which see in Israel, right? Exodus 12:48, and then it mentions 49, right? And when you look at all of these particular places, it's in reference to Israelites. And one prime example is Leviticus 25:45. This use for stranger, it uses the same word ger, and it uses sojourn in the same way, the same word for sojourn. And it makes mention of, I think in the prior verse before, it says, even though he be a stranger, talking about, an Israelite, right? Now, again, I want to just, we can hammer the point home that this is in reference to an Israelite, because once you get to the end of this particular excerpt within the lexicon, keep in mind it mentions Exodus 12:48. It groups it the same way as these passages, and then it says of Ephraim and Manasseh, which are Israelite tribes, sojourning with Judah and Benjamin. That's another example of how this particular word is being used based upon the context, right? And these are not, just Israelites, what I'm saying, that are that are putting these entries in the lexicon. These are just what the scholars are saying, and they're saying what we've been saying all along, right? Just through the Spirit and power of the Most High. That the the stranger here in Exodus 12:48 is in reference, to Israelites, right? They're just from another place, just not within that same country. So again, I just want to make it clear that it's very important to dive deep into the languages, right? And this came from me just looking at the language, looking at the lexicon, actually studying the particular word. This wasn't something that was just, I randomly it wasn't just willy-nilly, but the Most High led me to look into the language, and I found this particular part. So all praises to the Most High, right? But you have any points before I move on? All praises. So basically the sojourner or the stranger right here is one who is an Israelite of another country. But as we see, through analysis of the language and different translations, we can show, this and the distinctions between the different strangers explicitly, right? We looked at verse 43. That stranger is in reference to a non-Israelite, the heathendom. And then in verse 48, that stranger is in reference to somebody that's staying with you that's from, most likely a different tribe or a different country, right? But they're still your kindred, right? But if we were to just rely on the common, or Western reading and interpretation of this, we would get a different sense. We would say that this stranger in verse 48 is the same stranger in verse 43. And that's why everybody can just partake in the Passover, right? So I just want to emphasize that this was, again, just to show an example of why the language and yielding to it, is a significant part, in retraining our mind and how we look at things and how we actually, understand the Most High's instruction in His Word, right? We have to, be willing to dive into these things and take the time to, to seek it out, right? To get closer to what the truth of the Scriptures is, right? But you got any points?
You good? I'll cook it with fish grease.
All praises. God, all praises. So the next point I want to move on to is, just understanding that there's always more for us to learn, and understand about the Holy Scriptures. That's something very important. And I heard, I think I might have heard, it might have been on Clubhouse, or I might have been watching a video or something like that, but somebody, they echoed these same sentiments, because a lot of times what tends to happen is we come into, a state of mind where, like we've came into the truth. We understand, the breakdowns. We understand, the Daniel prophecy, or you understand, the 12 feathers, or things like that. But we have to understand that it's more for us to learn, right? It's always going to be something that you could seek out, and receive more understanding on, right? Let's jump to the book of Proverbs, verse chapter 5, chapter 1, verse 5.
And that lesson I mentioned earlier is not actually on the Flow Like Water YouTube channel. It's on the old Flow Like Water YouTube channel. So I'll either eventually upload that for y'all or redo the lesson. But said verse 5.
Verse 5.
A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels.
Con. So the Bible says a wise person or a wise man will hear and increase learning, meaning they'll hear wisdom and knowledge and increase what they know and understand. I believe that's why it's a passage in Sirach or Ecclesiasticus. I don't remember it off top, but it said that a man of understanding will hear a wise word and commend it and add thereto. Right? That's very important because if you're hearing something that's of wisdom and understanding, you should want to add it to your bag. You should want to add it to your arsenal, so to speak. It shouldn't be, well, I already know the breakdowns, I'm good. Like, you should never get to that point. Like, I'm not at that point. I'm always, every day I wake up and I listen to brothers teach and bring out information from the brother Hurt, every single week, to different brothers within the community that just bring it out just through the spirit and power of the Most High. And I think to myself, well, shoot, I got a lot to learn. Man, them brothers is mighty. I need to study. You know what I'm saying? And all praises to the Most High. It lights a righteous fire on me to actually continue to go seek things out and to study these matters out, right? But that's the type of mindset we should have, right? But let's jump to the book of Proverbs, chapter 18. We're gonna read this in ESV. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 15.
An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge.
So it says the intelligent mind acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge, right? Meaning they look for it, right? So we should never stop striving for knowledge and wisdom, especially about this book, because there's so much information that's hidden from our eyes, and you have to search and study. It's another place in Proverbs that says that it's the glory of the Most High to conceal a matter, and the glory of kings to search it out. It's a mighty thing to search certain matters out, and then especially when the Most High allows you to figure it out and come to a pretty solid consensus. That's one of the best feelings in the world. You like, I know for me, I praise the Most High for that. When I've been looking for something and I've been studying it, for days, praying to the Most High. Most High might lead me to ask a brother about it, and then I finally, find the information I'm looking for. That's a beautiful thing. But you got any points before I move on?
Beautiful lesson so far.
God, all praises. I just need you to read this. Lord of Christ, let me share my screen one more time, because I have this preface from this book. And just a side note, like, for all of you guys that like to jump into books and read, make sure y'all check out the preface of the book, because there'd be a lot of gems in the preface. There'd be a lot of gems in the preface. It's crazy. But I'm gonna pull this up. If you can you just read just the highlighted section?
This book is about a lost world, but it's not about a search for lost books or lost chalices or the lost Atlantis of Plato. This is a search for a lost culture that had a significant effect on how the Bible was written. Remarkably, even after thousands of years of people reading and studying the Bible, there is still more to learn and understand. That says a lot about the nature of the Bible and its divine author. But another reason calls for continuing study of the scripture. Like archaeologists finding ossuaries in ancient Jewish tombs, or mudlarkers digging up ancient Roman coins in the tidal mud of the Thames River, or scuba divers uncovering a sunken Greek ship in the Mediterranean Sea. Scholars are constantly exploring more and more of the ancient world and finding increasingly interesting insights. And all of that has potential for offering clearer understanding of the inspired and authoritative Word of God.
Kind of just to make sure I cite the source. This is from The Lost World of Scripture by John H. Walton, right? But in a nutshell, just to speak to what the brother read, what it's saying is that even though we've been reading the scriptures, and studying the Bible for thousands of years, there's always more to learn from it. That's the biggest point of what's being emphasized, right? It mentioned archaeological finding after finding. Um, and if in case you don't know what archaeology is, that's the study of human activity based on artifacts and other remains, right? And an example would be, as you see like ancient pottery. You see ancient pottery, or you see, different sculptures or depictions, that the ancients had. That's those are examples of artifacts, right? And then also the author, he mentioned, tombs and ossuaries, right? Which, ossuary is just a box where a dead person's bones went into. But the point is that it's an ongoing journey, when it comes to understanding everything pertaining to this book. There's a particular elder within the community. He said that the Bible is a living document, because the information that we find on it, it never stops, right? So we have to be willing to admit to ourselves that we don't know everything, and we have to be willing to continue learning, and that includes how we approach teaching, and studying the text. It doesn't just stop at teaching, but also studying. You have to go into each day, and even certain times you're looking at the text. If you look at something in a weird way the first time, you have to be willing to to say, well, you know what, I might not know what this is going into. I'm gonna have to sit and study this. Or I might not know what this is referencing. I'm gonna have to look at maybe some history on it, etc. Right? You have to be willing to come to that realization, so that you can go and find the information on it, so that you could actually know what it's talking about and be sounding what you're speaking, right? But you got any points on it before I move on?
Good.
Con, so let me stop sharing my screen. So, from going into the language, right? As I showed earlier, to going into history amongst other factors as well. These changes to our mindset, as far as how we approach the text, is very important, because this is how we truly, please the Most High, and also, as the Bible speaks about, that's how we study to show ourselves approved. Because when you're actually taking the time, to search these things out, to actually get to the bottom of it, to get to the answer, you're putting in a lot of effort. If you're truly and sincerely trying to, like get down to it, right? And sometimes, and because I'm not saying it's not like this all of the time, because the Most High, He can just place it, like right in front of you, but it's not like that all the time. And sometimes you actually got to search and just might have to read a few chapters. You might have to go and do some digging on something. And sometimes it'll be just plain, just plain upon tables. But you can't expect it to just be plain all of the time, right? You can't just expect to just, oh well, I know the breakdown. I know I'm an Israelite. I keep the commandments. I just know it. Like that's not how that's not how this goes, right? But we're gonna continue. We're gonna conclude it soon, if you can, right? Can you read for me 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15?
Time. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth.
Con. So it says, study to show yourself approved unto the Most High, excuse me, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, and rightly dividing the word of truth. So again, this passage is pretty straightforward. It's a pretty straightforward saying, right? By the Apostle Paul. But let's look at this particular word for study, right? Because it's very important. Again, to actually understand the severity of these particular words. Because, somebody can look at a word like study and they'll just say, yeah, just, study, just look at it, read it, cool, whatever. But this particular word study, which is Strong's G, let me go back to a Strong's G 4704, spudazo. It tells something. It tells a pretty interesting story, right? So the outline of biblical usage is to hasten, make haste, to exert oneself, endeavor, give diligence, right? And then when you look at the Thayer's Greek lexicon, it says the same thing, right? So it says to exert oneself, which means to apply a great effort, right? And I think a lot of people, they know what the word exert means, um, and the connotation behind it. When you exert yourself, you are pushing yourself a whole bunch. So I think that's pretty clear. But when you look at what it means to give difference in this context, it's actually in reference to giving the rest of what you have. That's what it means to give difference. So essentially, studying to show yourself approved. It doesn't just mean, hey, you read a verse here and there. You might just read a chapter. You just, okay, yeah, that's it. But sometimes you have to, sit there and give it some time. I remember the brother Hurt. He brought it out, maybe a week or two ago. But he said that there are times when he might, or he might have said it on the interview he did. But it might be times where he's just sitting, studying from 4 to 4. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, sometimes it gets to that. Like you might study for an hour, but it might not end there. You might go on for 2, 3, 4, etc. You might just be reading, you might just be looking up, particular history or words, etc. Right? But again, it's giving that effort and that energy, to truly get to the bottom of what the truth is in that particular circumstance and context, within what you're reading, right? So again, this this is very, and I can't stress this enough, this is very important and paramount to us retraining our minds, because we have to have the mindset of one being willing to jump into the language, even though that's outside of a lot of our comfort zones. We have to be willing to do that, but we also have to be willing to really search for the information. Because when we do these things, it actually it shows that we're willing to give the Most High our best. To truthfully exert ourselves. That's why the passage, it literally said a workman. right? Because it's truthfully it's work. Like it's work to study something out. Like it's work. It's not nothing that's just, oh well, you kind of casual with it, but it's truthfully at work, right? But Most High willing, this was helpful to somebody, through the spirit and power of Most High. That's everything I have for tonight, and I'm gonna end it off by giving all praises to the Most High in the name of His dear and beloved Son Yahweh Shai, and I'm gonna pass it to my brother Hurt, in case he has anything.
Oh, just excellent lesson. All praise to the Most High. And I guess you do you want to address what Craig asked? He said, "What about the congregation being used in Deuteronomy 23:8?"
Okay, Con. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could jump into it. The water. And something very important. Hopefully the brother Craig, he's still here.
And I'm guessing he's just asking, I guess to see what it says in the Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. Con, for sure. All praises to the Most High. Wow, it says. Oh yeah, let me share my screen, Shalaki.
And Craig, if you still here, you can comment.
Con, for sure. Yeah, hopefully he's still here. Yeah, hopefully he's still here. But yeah, Deuteronomy 23:8. It says, "The children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of Yahweh in their third generation." So, in reference to the congregation here, this is a different word, if I understand correctly. Yep, different word. The root is kahel, which is in reference to more so a reference to a place of assembly. It says assembly, company, congregation, convocation. So it is a gathering, but contextually speaking, this is a place of gathering for religious purposes, as we can see right here. Because contextually speaking, when you look at Deuteronomy 23, when you jump up, it speaks about who's allowed to enter into the congregation or the sanctuary, right? And I think Deuteronomy 23:7, this is a very I start laughing at this because I don't know if you know why I'm laughing at this, but
Somebody that's it. Yeah. Look, I had to look.
God, but it says, "Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land." And abhorrence is in reference to I see somebody laughing, but abhorrence is in reference to deterring somebody from like religious or ceremonial purposes. When you look at the word abhor, it's the word ta'av, or the root word ta'av, which is H8581. Now, we look at what it means to abhor. It means to abhor, be abominable, do abominably, and then in the false stem, it says to be abhorred, be detested, and then it says in ritual sense, in ethical sense. Now, when you look at the context of Deuteronomy 23, it references, I believe, ethical, or not ethical sense, but what was that? Not ethical sense, but the other ritual sense, right? Because regarded as abomination, abhor, and then it says ritual sense. And as far as rituals, that's in reference to, in being involved in doing certain prescribed tasks. So they weren't, we couldn't deter them from bringing, like just gifts and money and stuff like that. That's what this that is in reference to, so once they got to a particular point, it says a third generation. Once it got to a particular point, they were allowed to partake in that, of course, from a distance, because there were,
I was gonna say, Craig, he is the congregation. The word congregation is the same word used in that scripture also.
Which one?
No, he was asking. He was saying he was referring to verse 8, which uses the word congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess because you went to the other passage.
Yeah, and no, in verse 8, it's a different word for congregation from Exodus. That word is adat, and this word is kohel. So the word congregation right here into the congregation is kahel. So different word. Yeah, but this is in reference to like different like rituals and like trying to partake in like bringing gifts and stuff like that. But it's not talking about, hey, they can join into the group of Israel, because that wouldn't even contextually that wouldn't make sense, because they wouldn't become Israelites. If there's a group of Israelites and we say, okay, this Moabite, he can join in and be part of the group of Israelites, then that's not a group of Israelites. That's some Israelites with the Moabite. So hopefully that was helpful to the brother. Appreciate the question, Brother Craig. But if you got anything else, I'll pass it to you, brother.
Nothing else. Beautiful lesson, and all praise to the Most High. And if anybody's watching on the replay, we ask that you like, share, comment. Also, let us know that you were able to watch the video. And all praise to the Most High, man. Beautiful lesson.
All praises to the Most High. And we'll close it out with number 6 and 24 on down. Yahweh bless thee and keep thee. Yahweh make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. And with that, I'll say shalom.
Shalom, shalom, family.
It ain't for everybody. 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 Yeah, many you call, but few get chosen. Matthew 22 and 14. My righteousness gonna exceed that of the Pharisees.